On what should have been the most beautiful day of their lives, young couple's outdoor wedding ceremony at Crystal Lake Gardens became an unexpected lesson in prejudice, compassion, and the power of community. The spring afternoon was perfect, cherry blossoms swayed gently in the breeze, white chairs lined the lakeside lawn, and delicate flower arrangements adorned every corner of the venue. The bride, a talented pediatric nurse, had spent months planning every detail alongside her fiancé, a dedicated elementary school teacher. Their love story had begun 3 years earlier when they met while volunteering at a local children's hospital. Despite coming from different cultural backgrounds, their shared values and commitment to helping others had formed an unbreakable bond. As wedding guests began arriving at the picturesque venue, the atmosphere was filled with joy and excitement. Family members from both sides, though meeting for the first time, embraced warmly. The bride's grandmother had flown in from overseas, bringing traditional decorations that blended beautifully with the modern ceremony setup. The groom's parents had spent days preparing homemade delicacies for the reception, combining both families' culinary traditions. Everything was proceeding perfectly until 30 minutes before the ceremony. The wedding coordinator noticed an unfamiliar woman standing at the venue's entrance, speaking animatedly into her phone. At first, no one paid much attention. Gate crashers weren't uncommon at the popular wedding venue. However, the woman's voice grew increasingly hostile as she paced back and forth, gesturing at the wedding setup and the arriving guests. "Yes, they're everywhere now," she was overheard saying into her phone. "This is a respectable venue. I live in the neighborhood, and I pay my taxes. They clearly don't belong here." Her voice dripped with disdain as she continued describing the wedding party to whoever was on the other end of the call. The wedding coordinator, a veteran of hundreds of ceremonies, felt her heart sink as she realized what was unfolding. She had seen similar situations before, but never expected it at this particular wedding. Before she could intervene, the woman had already made her call to the local police department. Within minutes, 2 police cruisers pulled up to the venue's entrance, lights flashing. The sudden arrival of law enforcement caused immediate confusion among the guests. The bride, still getting ready in the venue's preparation suite, remained unaware of the developing situation. The groom, however, spotted the commotion from the lakeside gazebo where he had been greeting early arrivals. As the officers stepped out of their vehicles, the woman who had made the call rushed toward them, speaking rapidly and pointing toward the wedding setup. The lead officer, a seasoned veteran of the force, listened carefully while observing the scene before him. His expression remained neutral, but his eyes took in every detail: the joyful faces of the guests, the elegant decorations, the obvious care and love that had gone into planning this celebration. The wedding coordinator quickly approached the officers, professional portfolio in hand, ready to present all the necessary permits and documentation. But before she could speak, something unexpected happened. Several guests, who had witnessed similar situations in their own lives, stepped forward. Among them was a retired judge, a family friend of the bride, who had experienced his own share of prejudice during his early career. What happened next would not only transform this wedding day but would also become a powerful story of how love and understanding can overcome prejudice. The officers, taking in the full picture of what was really happening, were about to make a decision that would leave the prejudiced caller speechless and demonstrate that justice sometimes arrives in unexpected ways. The tension in the air was palpable as the lead officer turned back toward the woman who had made the call. The wedding guests held their breath, unsure of what would happen next. The groom stood his ground, dignity intact, ready to defend his right to celebrate his love story. This moment, though uninvited, would become an integral part of their wedding day story, a testament to standing strong in the face of prejudice and the unexpected allies who can emerge in moments of crisis. As the afternoon sun continued to shine over Crystal Lake Gardens, no one present could have predicted how this confrontation would unfold, or how it would ultimately strengthen the bonds between everyone present on this remarkable day. The lead officer, with 23 years of experience on the force, had seen his fair share of unnecessary calls. As he surveyed the beautiful wedding setup, his weathered face softened. His partner, a younger officer who had joined the force to make a real difference in her community, was already shaking her head slightly at the obvious nature of the situation. The woman who had made the call continued her tirade, her voice growing louder with each passing moment. "These people just showed up here. They're having some kind of gathering, and I've never seen them in this neighborhood before. This is a private venue, and I'm sure they don't have permission to be here." The retired judge stepped forward, his presence commanding immediate respect. "Officers, I believe I can help clarify this situation." His voice carried the weight of decades spent serving justice in the courthouse. He gestured toward the wedding coordinator, who promptly produced a thick folder containing all the necessary permits and rental agreements. Meanwhile, in the bridal suite, the atmosphere was still filled with joy and anticipation. The bride's best friend was helping her with final touches to her intricate hairstyle, while her mother carefully adjusted the delicate lace on her wedding gown. They had deliberately kept the unfolding drama from reaching her ears, determined to protect her special moment. Back at the entrance, the officers reviewed the documentation with thorough professionalism. The lead officer's expression grew increasingly stern, but not for the reason the caller had hoped. The younger officer began taking notes, her face reflecting a mix of disappointment and determination. The wedding coordinator, speaking in calm, measured tones, explained how the couple had booked the venue 6 months in advance. She pulled out her tablet, showing photos from their engagement photo shoot at the same location, their permit applications, and even the Instagram posts the venue had shared promoting their upcoming celebration. Several guests, who worked in various community leadership positions, had gathered nearby. Among them was a prominent local business owner who regularly hosted charity events at Crystal Lake Gardens. She stepped forward, recognizing the lead officer from various community meetings. "Officer Chen," she called out warmly, "I didn't expect to see you here today. This wonderful couple has been part of our community for years. The groom volunteers at our youth center every weekend." The woman who had made the call began to shift uncomfortably, her earlier confidence wavering as she realized her assumptions were being systematically dismantled. Her face reddened as she watched more guests approach, each with their own story about the couple's contributions to the community. A school principal spoke about how the groom had transformed his classroom into a safe haven for struggling students. A hospital administrator praised the bride's dedication during the recent health crisis, describing how she had worked double shifts to care for sick children. Each testimony painted a picture of a couple deeply woven into the fabric of their community. The younger officer closed her notebook and exchanged a meaningful look with her partner. They had seen enough. The lead officer turned to address the woman who had made the call, his voice firm but professional. "Ma'am, we need to have a serious discussion about making false reports and wasting police resources." As this conversation began, something remarkable was happening among the wedding guests. Instead of letting the incident cast a shadow over the celebration, they drew closer together. Parents explained to their children how to respond to prejudice with dignity. Elderly guests shared stories of how far society had come, while acknowledging how far it still had to go. The groom's father, who had remained quietly observant throughout the incident, finally spoke. His words, touched with both sadness and hope, resonated with everyone present. "Today, we are not just celebrating love between two people. We are celebrating the love of a community that stands together against hate." The wedding coordinator checked her watch. The ceremony was now running 15 minutes behind schedule. But instead of causing stress, this delay had transformed into a powerful prelude to the celebration. Guests were no longer simply attendees, they had become participants in a moment of collective strength and unity. As the officers prepared to escort the caller away from the venue, the groom made an unexpected request that would transform the entire situation. His response to hatred would become the talk of the town, not for its anger or retribution, but for its extraordinary display of grace and compassion. The next few moments would prove that sometimes, the most powerful response to prejudice is not confrontation, but kindness. The groom approached the officers and the distressed caller with measured steps. The afternoon sun caught the simple gold band he wore, a family heirloom from his grandfather who had taught him that the strongest response to hatred was unwavering kindness. As he drew closer, the gathered crowd fell silent, waiting to see how he would handle this painful interruption to his wedding day. "Ma'am," he said, his voice steady and clear, "I'd like to invite you to stay for the ceremony." The unexpected words sent ripples of surprise through the assembled guests. The woman who had made the call stood frozen, her mouth slightly open in shock. Even the officers exchanged glances of amazement. The groom continued, "I'm a teacher, and I've learned that fear often comes from not knowing each other. Today is a celebration of love, family, and community. Perhaps by sharing this moment with us, you'll see that we're not so different after all." His words carried no trace of anger or resentment, only a genuine desire to bridge the divide that fear had created. The wedding coordinator wiped away tears as she checked her phone. Messages were pouring in from other vendors who were adjusting their schedules to accommodate the slight delay. The caterers had already promised to keep the food warm, and the photographer was capturing these unexpected moments with subtle grace, understanding that they were documenting not just a wedding, but a powerful moment of human connection. The officers, who had arrived expecting to handle a disturbance, found themselves witnessing a masterclass in compassion. The lead officer stepped forward. "Sir, your response to this situation is commendable. However, we still need to address the issue of the false report." He turned to the caller, whose face had transformed from righteous indignation to visible shame. The woman who had made the call began to tremble slightly, tears welling up in her eyes. I don't deserve this kindness," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "I assumed. I judged without." She couldn't finish her sentences as the weight of her actions finally hit her. The groom's mother, who had been quietly observing, approached with a gentle smile. She had faced similar prejudice when she first moved to the neighborhood decades ago. Rather than speak, she simply offered a tissue to the crying woman. This small gesture of kindness seemed to break something open in the caller's heart. Meanwhile, the bride's father had been tasked with the delicate job of explaining the delay to his daughter. As he entered the bridal suite, he found her adding final touches to her makeup. "Sweetheart," he began, "something remarkable is happening outside." As he shared the story, the bride's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness or anger, but of pride in the man she was about to marry. The bride had a quick discussion with her father and then sent him back out with a message of her own. When he returned to the garden, he approached the small group still gathered near the entrance. "My daughter would like to add something to her fiancé's invitation," he announced. "She says that if you choose to stay, she'd be honored if you would write a message in their guest book, not about today's misunderstanding, but about your hopes for the future." This unexpected grace from both bride and groom had a profound effect on everyone present. The caterers, who had been discreetly watching from their station, began preparing an extra place setting. The florist silently added another boutonniere to her collection. The photographers captured the subtle transformations in people's faces as they witnessed this extraordinary display of forgiveness and inclusion. The woman who had made the call stood trembling, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "I came here to cause trouble, and you're offering me kindness I don't deserve." The lead officer, who had seen countless confrontations end in anger and arrest, watched in amazement as this situation transformed into something entirely unexpected. The wedding coordinator, ever practical even in emotional moments, glanced at her watch again. "We can delay the ceremony another 10 minutes if needed," she offered softly. Sometimes the most important moments at a wedding aren't the ones we plan for. As word of what was happening spread through the waiting guests, something beautiful began to unfold. Instead of frustration at the delay, people began sharing their own stories of times when forgiveness had transformed their lives. The string quartet, inspired by the moment, began playing a soft melody that drifted across the garden, creating a soundtrack for this unexpected scene of reconciliation. Just then, a light breeze swept through the garden, carrying rose petals through the air like nature's own celebration of this moment. The sun broke through a cloud, casting a warm glow over the gathering, as if heaven itself was approving of this transformation of hatred into hope. The next moments unfolded like scenes from a dream. The woman who had made the call found herself being gently guided to a seat in the back row by the groom's aunt, who had faced similar prejudices when she first arrived in the country 30 years ago. The police officers, after completing their official report about the false call, were also invited to stay, not as law enforcement, but as witnesses to this extraordinary moment of human connection. The lead officer respectfully declined, knowing he had other duties to attend to, but his younger partner asked if she could remain for a few minutes of the ceremony after her shift ended. Something about this couple's response to hatred had touched her deeply, reminding her why she had joined the force in the first place. In the bridal suite, the wedding coordinator finally gave the bride the full story of what had transpired. Instead of being upset about the delay, the bride reached for her grandmother's hand, squeezing it gently. Her grandmother, who had lived through decades of prejudice and hardship, smiled through tears of pride. "This," she said in her native language, "is how we change the world, one heart at a time." The bride made a quick decision. She opened the elegant box containing her something borrowed, a delicate lace handkerchief that had been in her best friend's family for generations. "Give this to her," she told the coordinator, referring to the caller. "Tell her that today, she's not just a witness to our wedding. She's part of our story of change." As the guests finally settled into their seats, there was a palpable difference in the atmosphere. This was no longer just a wedding ceremony, it had become a testament to the power of love to transform hearts. The string quartet began playing the processional music, its notes carrying across the garden with renewed purpose. The groom took his place at the altar, standing tall under the flower-adorned arch. His eyes glistened with unshed tears, but his smile was radiant. His best friend, standing beside him, whispered, "What you did back there, that's exactly who you are. That's why we're all here today." The wedding party began their procession down the aisle. Each member carried not just their bouquet or boutonniere, but also the weight of what they had just witnessed. The flower girl, too young to understand the full significance of what had happened, scattered rose petals with extra enthusiasm, some landing on the caller's lap, making her smile through her tears. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. The bride appeared at the end of the aisle, and a collective gasp rose from the assembled guests. She was radiant, but it wasn't just her beautiful gown or perfectly arranged hair that caught everyone's attention. There was something more, a glow of pride and love that transcended the physical. As she walked down the aisle on her father's arm, she locked eyes with the woman who had tried to stop her wedding. Instead of anger or resentment, she offered a gentle smile. In that moment, she wasn't just walking toward her future husband, she was walking toward a future where love truly could conquer hate. The ceremony itself became a tapestry of cultures and traditions, each element carefully chosen to honor both families' heritage. The officiant, who had been briefly informed of the earlier events, worked subtle messages of unity and understanding into his prepared speech. "Love," he said, "is not just about two people joining their lives. It's about communities coming together, bridges being built, and hearts being opened." During the ring exchange, the couple had originally planned to recite traditional vows. Instead, inspired by the events of the day, they each added a personal promise. The groom spoke about being a light in the darkness, about choosing love over fear. The bride's additional vows touched on the strength found in forgiveness and the power of unexpected moments to change lives. In the audience, the woman who had made the call found herself deeply moved by every word. She clutched the borrowed handkerchief, watching as two families became one, as two cultures blended seamlessly, as love proved itself stronger than prejudice. The young police officer, who had stayed at the back, wiped away tears of her own. The wedding photographer captured it all, the sunshine breaking through clouds at just the right moment, the slight breeze carrying flower petals through the air, the genuine emotions on every face. But most importantly, they captured the transformation visible in the caller's expression as she witnessed the true beauty of what she had initially feared. As the officiant pronounced the couple married, the applause that erupted was for more than just the newlyweds. It was for love's victory over hate, for grace's triumph over judgment, for the power of forgiveness to transform lives. The string quartet struck up a joyous tune, and as the couple made their way back down the aisle, they paused briefly beside the caller's seat. The reception venue sparkled with fairy lights and fresh flowers as guests made their way from the garden ceremony. The incident that had threatened to derail the wedding had instead infused it with an unexpected depth of meaning. The young police officer, who had decided to stay after her shift, found herself drawn into conversations with guests who shared their own stories of transformation and hope. The cocktail hour became a beautiful blend of cultures, with servers carrying trays of both families' traditional appetizers. The couple had worked with their caterer for months to ensure the menu represented both their heritages perfectly. Now, these carefully chosen dishes served as conversation starters, bringing guests from different backgrounds together over shared appreciation of new flavors. The woman who had made the call sat at a table near the back, still holding the bride's borrowed handkerchief. Throughout the evening, different guests stopped by her table, not to condemn, but to share. The groom's young cousin offered her a plate of traditional sweets. "My grandmother made these," she explained softly. "She says sharing food is the first step to understanding each other." The wedding coordinator, watching the scene unfold, noticed something remarkable. Instead of the usual reception pattern where guests clustered with people they knew, there was a constant flow of movement between tables. People were genuinely interested in getting to know each other, sparked by the powerful lesson in forgiveness they had witnessed. As dinner was served, the father of the bride rose to give his speech. He spoke about love's power to transform, weaving in the day's events with subtle grace. "Today," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "we witnessed not just the union of two people, but the power of love to break down walls we didn't even know we had built." The bride's best friend had originally planned a light-hearted speech full of college memories and inside jokes. Instead, she spoke about watching her friend grow into someone who could face prejudice with grace. "I've always known you were special," she said, addressing the couple, "but today, you taught us all how to be better human beings." During the traditional first dance, the newlyweds swayed to a song that seemed to take on new meaning after the day's events. The lyrics about love overcoming all obstacles resonated differently now. Guests watched with tears in their eyes, understanding they were witnessing something far more significant than a typical wedding reception. The dance floor soon filled with guests from all backgrounds moving to a carefully curated playlist that blended both families' musical traditions. The bride's grandmother, initially hesitant to dance, found herself being taught some modern moves by the groom's teenage cousins. The woman who had made the call watched from her table, visibly moved by the joyous integration of cultures before her. As the evening progressed, the guest book made its way around the room. When it reached the caller's table, she sat for a long moment with the pen hovering over the page. Finally, with tears in her eyes, she began to write. Her message, though private, would later become one of the couple's most treasured wedding memories, a testament to the transformative power of forgiveness. The young police officer, before leaving, approached the couple to express her gratitude. "In our training," she explained, "we learn about de-escalation, but what you did today was something else entirely. You didn't just prevent conflict, you created understanding. I'll carry this lesson with me throughout my career." The wedding photographer captured candid moments throughout the evening, the caller sharing a laugh with the bride's aunt over a shared love of gardening, the groom's little brother teaching traditional dance moves to other guests, the bride's grandmother holding hands with the groom's mother as they watched the celebrations. Each photo told a story of barriers breaking down and connections being formed. The wedding cake cutting ceremony took on special significance. The cake itself was a beautiful fusion of both families' traditional wedding desserts, created by a local baker who had worked closely with both mothers to perfect the recipe. As the couple fed each other the first bites, guests cheered not just for their union, but for everything this day had come to represent. Later in the evening, the bride's father noticed the caller preparing to leave quietly. He approached her, speaking softly. "You know," he said, "sometimes it takes great courage to let your heart be changed. Thank you for having that courage today." His words, gentle and sincere, brought fresh tears to her eyes. As she reached the door, she turned back to take one last look at the celebration. The dance floor was full of joy, the room alive with laughter and conversation. People who had been strangers hours ago were now exchanging phone numbers and making plans to meet again. She realized that she had witnessed not just a wedding, but a powerful demonstration of how love and forgiveness could transform a community. The days following the wedding brought unexpected ripples of change throughout the community. What had begun as an attempt to disrupt a celebration had transformed into a catalyst for understanding. The story of the couple's response to prejudice spread through the neighborhood, carried by wedding guests who couldn't stop talking about what they had witnessed. The local coffee shop became a hub of conversation as people who had attended the wedding shared their experiences with others. The barista, who had been working at the reception, told customers about how she had seen the caller slowly open up throughout the evening, eventually joining in conversations and even learning a few traditional dance steps from the bride's cousins. A week after the wedding, the woman who had made the call did something remarkable. She walked into the elementary school where the groom taught, carrying a carefully wrapped package. Inside was the borrowed handkerchief, freshly pressed, along with a heartfelt letter. The school secretary, who had heard about the wedding incident, watched with quiet amazement as the woman asked if she could volunteer at the school's upcoming multicultural fair. The young police officer who had stayed for the ceremony took the lessons from that day back to her precinct. During a training session about community relations, she shared the story of how forgiveness and inclusion had accomplished what confrontation never could. Her superior officers were so moved that they invited the newlyweds to speak at the department's next community outreach program. The wedding photographer's images began circulating on social media, not for the typical reasons wedding photos go viral, but for the powerful story they told. One particular photo captured the moment when the caller, moved by the ceremony, reached out to squeeze the hand of the bride's grandmother. The image became a symbol of hope and transformation in a time when such stories were desperately needed. At Crystal Lake Gardens, the venue managers noticed a change in their community interactions. Other couples planning their wedding specifically requested to hear about the Unity Wedding, as it had come to be known. The venue began offering their space for community gatherings aimed at bringing different cultural groups together, inspired by how one wedding had bridged so many divides. The bride's hospital colleagues were touched by the story when she returned from her honeymoon. The pediatric ward where she worked had always been a place of compassion, but now she brought an even deeper understanding of how to handle difficult situations with grace. Parents from all backgrounds felt more comfortable bringing their children to the hospital, sensing the genuine warmth and acceptance that radiated from the staff. The groom's elementary school classroom became a model for teaching inclusion and understanding. Without directly referencing the wedding incident, he developed lessons that helped his students understand the importance of looking beyond first impressions. His students, picking up on these subtle messages, started their own initiatives to make sure no one felt left out during recess or lunch. The retired judge who had been present at the wedding found himself sharing the story during a community leadership meeting. The impact was immediate. Local business owners and community leaders began discussing ways to make their neighborhood more welcoming to all. The woman who had made the call, hearing about these initiatives, quietly signed up to help. 1 month after the wedding, the neighborhood association had its regular meeting. The topic of discussion shifted from property values and landscaping regulations to how they could foster a more inclusive community. The caller, who had once been concerned about maintaining the neighborhood's character, now spoke passionately about the importance of welcoming new families from all backgrounds. The wedding caterer experienced an unexpected boost in business as word spread about how they had handled the fusion menu with such respect and care. They began offering cooking classes that brought together traditional recipes from different cultures, creating yet another space for community members to connect and learn from each other. The string quartet that had played at the wedding was inspired to create a new program called Music Builds Bridges, performing at schools and community centers. They incorporated musical traditions from various cultures into their repertoire, helping young people understand that beauty can be found in all forms of expression. Even the local paper picked up the story, not for its controversy, but for its demonstration of how compassion could transform a community. The article focused on the positive changes that had rippled out from that single afternoon, inspiring other neighborhoods to examine their own approaches to diversity and inclusion. The couple's wedding video, when it was finally ready, captured something far more meaningful than just a ceremony and reception. It documented a moment of transformation, not just for one person, but for an entire community. The videographer included subtle moments that might have otherwise been missed, the gentle exchanges between unlikely friends, the gradual softening of barriers, the quiet gestures of understanding. 3 months after the wedding, the caller wrote a letter to the local paper. Without mentioning her own role in the events, she spoke about how her neighborhood had changed for the better, how she had discovered the joy of knowing neighbors from different backgrounds, and how one act of forgiveness had opened her eyes to a whole new way of seeing her community. 6 months after the wedding, the couple's story had touched lives far beyond their local community. A popular documentary filmmaker, who had heard about the incident through the police officer's community outreach presentation, approached the couple about sharing their experience. Though initially hesitant to draw attention to themselves, they agreed when they realized how their story could help others. The filmmaker spent weeks interviewing wedding guests, capturing the ripple effects of that remarkable day. The bride's grandmother spoke about surviving decades of prejudice and how seeing her granddaughter's response had given her renewed hope for the future. The groom's students, with their parents' permission, shared how their teacher's example had changed their perspective on handling conflicts in the playground. The woman who had made the call also agreed to be interviewed, though she requested anonymity. Her testimony became one of the documentary's most powerful moments. "I thought I was protecting my community," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Instead, I learned what community really means. It's not about keeping people out, it's about bringing people together." The young police officer's career had taken an unexpected turn. Inspired by what she had witnessed, she developed a new training program for her department focusing on community engagement and cultural understanding. Her superiors were so impressed that they recommended the program to other precincts. Soon, police departments in neighboring cities were implementing similar initiatives. The retired judge, seeing the impact of the wedding story, began working with local schools to develop programs teaching conflict resolution through compassion. He used his connections in the legal community to create internship opportunities for students from diverse backgrounds, helping to build a more inclusive future for the legal profession. The wedding venue had become known for more than just its beautiful lakeside setting. Couples planning their ceremonies now specifically requested to hear about the Unity Wedding, and asked for advice on incorporating elements of cultural bridge building into their own celebrations. The venue's booking manager found herself becoming an unexpected advocate for inclusive event planning. The impact reached the hospital where the bride worked as well. The pediatric ward implemented new programs to make families from all backgrounds feel more welcome. The bride's approach to handling difficult situations with grace and understanding became part of the hospital's training protocol for new staff members. Other departments began requesting similar training. The groom's elementary school had undergone its own transformation. What started as one teacher's example had grown into a school-wide commitment to fostering understanding and acceptance. The annual multicultural fair, once a small event, had grown into a community-wide celebration that brought together families from all over the city. Local businesses, inspired by the story, began examining their own practices. The wedding caterer's fusion cooking classes had sparked a trend, with other restaurants and food businesses following suit. Shopping centers began hosting cultural exchange events, and local artists collaborated on murals celebrating the community's diversity. The couple themselves had become reluctant ambassadors for change, though they never sought the spotlight. They were invited to speak at community events, but always focused on the larger message rather than their personal story. "What happened at our wedding was just one moment," the bride would say. "The real story is what happens when people choose to open their hearts to understanding." Their first wedding anniversary approached, and the community planned a surprise celebration. The same venue that had witnessed their wedding now hosted a gathering of hundreds, not just wedding guests, but people whose lives had been touched by the ripple effects of that day. The woman who had made the call helped organize the event, working alongside the bride's family as if they'd known each other for years. During the anniversary celebration, stories emerged of how the wedding had influenced people in unexpected ways. A local real estate agent shared how she had changed her approach to helping new families find homes in the community. Business owners talked about creating more inclusive hiring practices. Teachers spoke about incorporating lessons of empathy and understanding into their daily classroom activities. The original wedding photographer's images had been featured in a traveling exhibition about community transformation. One photo in particular, showing the caller and the bride's grandmother embracing at the reception, had become a symbol of hope and reconciliation. Art students at the local college used these images as inspiration for projects about social change. The String Quartet's Music Builds Bridges program had expanded to multiple cities, bringing together musicians from different cultural backgrounds to create new forms of musical expression. They performed at the anniversary celebration, playing a piece specially composed to honor the wedding story's impact on the community. The young police officer, now promoted to a community relations position, used the anniversary gathering to announce a new citywide initiative. Inspired by the wedding story, the program would bring together law enforcement and community members for regular dialogue sessions, breaking down barriers and building understanding. 1 year after the wedding that changed a community, the couple sat in their cozy living room, looking through their wedding album. Each photograph told a story beyond the typical wedding memories. They captured moments of transformation that continued to ripple through their community and beyond. The borrowed handkerchief, now framed alongside a copy of the caller's letter, hung on their wall as a reminder that love could transform even the most challenging situations. The documentary about their wedding story had premiered at a local film festival, drawing unexpected attention from national media. But what touched the couple most weren't the headlines or accolades, it was the messages they received from people who had found hope in their story. Teachers wrote about using the documentary in their classrooms to discuss conflict resolution. Community leaders shared how it had inspired them to create new programs promoting understanding and inclusion. The woman who had made the call had undergone perhaps the most remarkable transformation. She now led a community group dedicated to welcoming new families to the neighborhood, regardless of their background. Every month, she organized dinner gatherings where neighbors could share their cultural traditions and stories. Her garden, once a source of pride for its pristine appearance, now bloomed with flowers from around the world, each plant gifted by a different neighbor. The young police officers' training program had been adopted by police departments across the state. She often began her sessions by showing footage from the wedding, using it to demonstrate how compassion could diffuse tension and create lasting positive change. The lead officer who had responded that day came out of retirement to help with the training, sharing his perspective on how that single incident had changed his understanding of community policing. Crystal Lake Gardens had become more than just a wedding venue. It now hosted regular community events celebrating diversity and understanding. The space where the ceremony had taken place was dedicated as a Garden of Unity, with plaques sharing stories of how different cultures came together in celebration. The wedding coordinator had become an expert in helping couples incorporate cultural bridge-building elements into their ceremonies. The bride's hospital had seen remarkable changes too. The pediatric ward where she worked had become a model for cultural competency in healthcare. Families from all backgrounds felt welcomed and understood, leading to better health outcomes and stronger community connections. Other hospitals began sending their staff to learn from their approach. The groom's elementary school classroom had become a living laboratory for teaching empathy and understanding. His students started a pen pal program with schools in different neighborhoods, breaking down barriers through friendship and shared stories. The school board adopted his curriculum changes district-wide, recognizing that academic success flourished in an environment of acceptance and understanding. The retired judge's conflict resolution program had expanded beyond schools into community centers and workplaces. He often reflected on how witnessing that wedding day had inspired him to create a legacy of positive change in the legal system. Young law students now interned with his program, learning how compassion could work alongside justice. Local businesses that had adopted more inclusive practices reported stronger community connections and increased success. The wedding caterer's fusion cooking classes had a months-long waiting list, bringing together people who might never have met otherwise. Other business owners followed suit, creating spaces where cultural exchange could happen naturally. The String Quartet's Music Builds Bridges program had grown into a full-fledged cultural arts initiative, receiving grants to expand their work nationwide. They performed at schools, community centers, and corporate events, using music to break down barriers and build understanding. Their composition inspired by the wedding story became their signature piece, moving audiences to tears with its message of hope and transformation. The couple's first child was born into a community vastly different from the one that existed before their wedding. At the baby shower, guests represented a beautiful tapestry of cultures and backgrounds, all celebrating together. The woman who had made the call was there, now a close family friend, helping to organize games that celebrated different cultural traditions for welcoming new life. The documentary filmmaker returned to capture this moment, amazed at how the story continued to evolve. What had begun as a potential tragedy had transformed into a continuing journey of hope and understanding. The film's sequel focused not on the wedding day itself, but on how a single act of forgiveness could transform an entire community. As the couple prepared for their child's naming ceremony, they chose to hold it in the same garden where their wedding had taken place. The venue, once just a beautiful setting, now stood as a symbol of how love could break down walls and build bridges. The ceremony would bring together not just family and friends, but an entire community that had learned to see difference not as a threat, but as a gift. The caller's letter, framed in their home, ended with words that had become a motto for the community: "Sometimes our greatest mistakes can lead to our greatest growth, if we have the courage to learn from them." These words were now inscribed on a bench in the Garden of Unity, reminding visitors that transformation was always possible. As this chapter of their story drew to a close, the couple realized that their wedding day hadn't just been about their love for each other, it had become a catalyst for showing how love could transform an entire community. Their story continued to inspire others to choose understanding over fear, compassion over judgment, and love over hate, proving that sometimes the most beautiful moments can arise from the most unexpected circumstances.